Hey everyone, welcome to Culture Shock. This is the internet's home for great conversations around culture, media, and Gen Z. Today I'm sitting down with a good friend of mine, Latha Duncan, who has been in the entertainment field for well over a decade. He started as a lawyer, still in the legal field, but also he is someone who has worked at prominent places like Lionsgate and also is now on his own building stuff in the creator realm. We talk a lot about the business of film and television. We talk about some of our favorite things around the culture of film and television, but also our thoughts equally on the creator space and where things are headed, and also how to connect with people in the world today. If you do enjoy this episode, please make sure to subscribe, recommend it to your friends. If you do subscribe, there will be a hype button as well. That helps the show get out to more people. And without further ado, guys, let's get to the interview. Hey everyone, welcome to Culture Shock. This is a podcast or talk show where we talk about everything culture, content creators, film, TV, you name it. And today I'm excited to have on the podcast, Latha, introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Latha Duncan. So I'm an entertainment attorney by trade, born and raised in Los Angeles. I grew up in Redondo Beach and still live in the LA area. I worked in-house at Lionsgate for just under 11 years. And since I left, I've been getting into a number of different projects, but all around entertainment law, kind of broadly speaking. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, Latha, first question I ask everybody that comes on the show is, what does culture mean to you?
What does culture mean to me? I mean, culture means to me, I guess, probably a lot of things, but the overarching theme really would be, um, you know, touch points throughout my life, memories, whether it's personal memories, professional memories. So many of those have been driven by culture. It brings to mind the word zeitgeist, right? There's so many things it brings to mind, but really just sort of feeling connected to others. Big sense of connection, I guess, underlies culture for me. The way that different types of cultures interplay and interact and create even more enjoyment for everyone. Those combinations are a big part of why I enjoy different cultures coming together so much. So I think maybe just all kind of revolving around the themes of memories, togetherness, life experiences broadly. So many of those are driven by culture.
Absolutely. So, what would you say is the first moment in your mind that you can think of that defines culture for you? Maybe it's your favorite film, television show, or music album that you grew up listening to.
The big ones for me that stand out are both skateboarding and mountain biking. So I got into skateboarding. I don't know when exactly, but around like probably fourth or fifth grade or something, somewhere in that range. And was always into riding bikes as well. And then my dad got me my first kind of proper mountain bike. Probably around sixth grade. Around that age. But going back to getting into these different, into these different sports, so many of my friends were into them. So it was a big, community thing for me growing up. Everyone goes out down the street, skateboards together, etc. But it was really kind of tapping into that broader culture. For me, it was the magazines. It was going to the skate shop and buying, saving my allowance up so that I could buy skateboard videos on VHS. And then it was trying to emulate the tricks and failing mostly, but bringing the camcorder out to the driveway and filming each other trying to copy the tricks that we saw in the video. But it was everything around that. It was the professional skateboarding culture. It was the X Games on TV. It was the way that people were dressing and picking up on slang terminology and names of tricks and all this kind of stuff. And it was just such a like an overwhelming cultural force for me and for most of my friends growing up. So that was probably the first kind of really big one. Mountain biking, similar thing. And then I also grew up surfing, so there's similar themes around that as well. But kind of beach culture generally, I guess, kind of underlies all of these different things. So growing up in Redondo Beach, right next to the water, skateboarding, surfing, and just those sorts of cultural influences just came pretty naturally. So I think those were probably my first big ones.
Absolutely. Look, you and I are both Los Angeles area natives. So I'm going to ask you a question that some people are going to think is a little bit on a high horse, but why is Los Angeles the best city in the world and the best cultural hotspot in the world?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of cliches will probably come out when I say this. The idea of being able to, go to the beach and then go to the mountains and then go up the coast and, down the coast. These are the sorts of things. People say them so frequently that it just sounds like nothing but cliches, but it genuinely is true. I mean, that was a huge part of it for me. Grew up in a quiet community, but also had access to LA proper. So, I remember going to the Santa Monica Promenade as a kid with my parents.
Yep.
And, that felt at the time, we were so young, that felt like a million miles away. And, growing up, just all sorts of experiences like that. But, now as an adult, I went to law school in downtown LA. That was the first time that I really, aside from kind of like isolated visits here and there, that was the first time that I really spent a lot of time in downtown LA. The city is just so diverse, honestly. But it also is such a blend, again, going back to the idea of blending different cultures in the same way that you see in, New York City or Washington, D.C. or other major cities throughout the world. You get such a combination of different cultures in all ways. Experiences, food, day-to-day life, interacting with people. All of these different things take on, I think, for me, greater meaning now as an adult, especially now that my wife and I have two young kids. Looking forward to them growing up and being around, such diversity in all of these different ways. It's just that's huge for us.
Yeah. Look, I will always say that I'm thankful I was born in the greatest city on earth, that being Los Angeles. Technically, I was born in Santa Monica. My mom, me, my uncle, and all were raised in Culver City. So like I wholeheartedly agree with you. One of my favorite things, and I think you'll appreciate this, especially being in the movie space for so long, is that in order for me and my family to go see a movie when we would go out to LA, is we would have to drive from Culver City past the Sony Pictures lot to go to the historic Culver Theater.
Hmm.
And I'm thankful that I got to go to the I'm still thankful that it exists to this day, even through all the changes of being independent, ArcLight, everything.
Hmm.
So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I even talked about this with someone earlier today, where it's like Los Angeles is the place where we have the best sports teams, the best music, the best film and television culture, the best lifestyle. I think we have the best mix of, if you love Asian food, Mexican food, Indian food, Middle Eastern food, Americanized food, you have all of that at basically your disposal. You could walk down the street and experience something that you've never had before. I would say two of my favorite restaurants, I don't know if you've ever had them in the LA area, was Dinah's Kitchen, which used to
Hmm.
be on the side of the I-5, I believe, not too far from the Westfields in Culver City.
Hmm.
And it's it used to, the original location is like 5 minutes from where TikTok's headquarters is. So that was
Yeah.
fun. Unfortunately, they boarded it up and moved into a food hall. I'm so glad that they exist, though. The other one for me was Tito's Tacos on the corner of Washington and Sepulveda. My
Yep.
family and I, we would go there all the time. When I go there to LA, I'm like, this is where I have to stop. It is not, oh, I hope I get to. It is a must go to.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. I mean, places like that are just institutions, and it's fun to have
Yeah.
them. Yeah, all of those, kind of like stereotypical LA experiences, they're great. I'm so grateful to be able to have them. Driving one of them for me is, well, I mean, there are so many, right?
Yeah.
Driving north on Doheny in Beverly
Yeah.
Hills, looking at the hills and the palm trees. sort of like quintessential LA. But then you have driving PCH, going up to Malibu, totally
Yeah.
different experience.
And
You have all,
even if you think about it, places like Big Bear.
yeah, yeah, completely. I mean, I went to a science sleepaway camp in Big Bear when I was in sixth grade. So just yeah, all of these. I mean, these are all in different ways. These are all kind of cultural touch points. Going back to what I was saying about all of these kind of cultural things are tied in so many ways to memories for me. But yeah, no, the food is great, and a funny thing, it's just one of those things you end up taking for granted living in a place like this,
Yeah.
as much as you try not to. But when my parents retired, they moved out of state to a much smaller town, and great to visit. I love it. But when you're there, you realize, wow, it's you
How
all
fortunate
of a
you
sudden
are to have all of this. Yeah.
completely. Yep.
One of the things I wonder is what made you interested in the entertainment industry? Was it a particular film or television show that you watched that made you say, this is the career path I want to go down?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, um so no one in my family works in the entertainment industry in any capacity. No one in my family is an attorney either. So it was sort of a, something that I came up with on my own over the years. But I think I think originally for me it was my parents signed me up for a DVD club back in the day, mail order DVD club, and it was like such a thrill to get those in the mail. Then that eventually translated. So through that, I was able to experience a wide variety of movies, including classic films and everything. And sort of just like watching movies generally was always a thing that I did with my parents growing up. So it was always kind of in my mind. I think it's something that I really enjoyed. I think fast forward to high school, and I took a film class at the high school, which was a film studies class. Had a great teacher in that class, really loved it a lot. And I almost had a thought like, oh, maybe I'll explore, film school or something like that. But when I got to undergrad, decided to pursue something different. And, anyway, I still was able to take film classes in undergrad. And, by that point, it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I'll own it. By that point, Entourage was out,
Yep.
and that was a big one for me. I think it was really eye opening. Aside from the show just being fun to watch, it was really eye opening for me because, like I said, I didn't have anyone in my family working in entertainment in any capacity. So you know, I was thinking of, oh, there's a director and there's a producer and there's an actor, and I get that. But the world behind the camera on the business side was all kind of a mystery to me. And in watching Entourage, through the comedy and through all of the, kind of how crazy the show was, I was able to pick up on, okay, there are people doing different types of jobs here. There are agents, there are attorneys. What do they do? What do these roles mean, and how do they influence what you ultimately see on the screen? And I was just kind of like taken by that. I think initially, I had this fantasy of being this kind of Ari Gold character.
Yep.
um, probably not my personality type, so probably a good thing that I didn't end up pursuing that ultimately. But I think that was kind of like what opened my eyes to the idea that there's so much you can do in the industry, behind the camera. So I think that was probably it.
Yeah, and for those that don't understand, the character Ari Gold was based off of Ari Emanuel, the founder or one of the founders and chairs of Endeavor, and now one of the heads of TKO, which owns like UFC and WWE. So definitely a touch point of itself. And I think that's fascinating that you're like, I did not envision this until I saw this television show and then realized there's so much to it. I think that's the intricacy of entertainment that so many people think about, is like when a show is made, you think of the host or the main characters. You don't think about the cast, or the rest of the cast, the crew, the people producing it, writing it, the people behind the scenes who are working on behalf of a studio or network that's
Hmm.
green lighting it or budgeting or financing something. So I think that that's super cool. One of my biggest um, influences, I think, sort of in the way that I look at media over the last 10 years is Mark Pedowitz, who was the head of the CW. Because I look at, like, you were a guy who, even before the CW, was president of ABC Studios and greenlighting Grey's Anatomy and Castle and so many of these other great shows before Arrow and all the DC shows and then the 100 and so many other great shows on top
Yeah.
of that. So I fully agree with you on that front. What I would want to know is, throughout all of your stops at Lionsgate, because you did a lot of stuff there over a decade, what was your favorite film that the studio came out with?
Uh, it's probably not surprising, but it's definitely John Wick for me. The first one was coming out, I guess. So was it already released or was it about to come out when I first started at Lionsgate? Kind of like my literal day one. So before I actually officially started at Lionsgate, I was aware,
Yeah,
obviously, that it was coming out, that it was a thing. So then over the years, it was just it was just such a fun franchise to be
yeah,
involved in. That's got to be my number one. Saw is another big one. I'm not quite as much of a horror guy, but again, just like a long standing franchise. It was just so much fun to
yeah.
be involved in.
Yeah, it came out in October, I believe, like early or no, late October. So a few months after you had started working there. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I would say the John Wick movies I always love because I think just action stuff is cool. I didn't like Mission Impossible, so I thought that's what made John Wick so much cooler. Was like, okay, you're not going the Fast and Furious route, you're not going the Mission Impossible route, but also like the pure insanity of some of the things that are done in the John Wick films are just like, okay, great. Like there's that iconic pencil scene from the first and I think the second movie that,
Hmm.
like, I always tell people, I'm like, I know this is fiction, but I'm like, still, this has to be like the like craziest thing I've ever seen somebody do in a fight. Is
Yeah,
like stab somebody in the ear with a pencil and then shove it into somebody's ears. Like, I'm like, all right, cool.
I know,
Like,
it's crazy.
for me, I was like, there's the movies that they're like, we'll throw the kitchen sink and then throw more, and I'm like, John Wick is like, and more after that.
Hmm.
Um, but
Yeah.
I think that's also a testament to how good of Keanu Reeves as an actor is. Um, one thing I wonder, I know that there's this meme that's circulated for so long. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but so many people have the belief, and I sort of do too, in joking this, that Keanu Reeves is immortal.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I, have you ever seen that? What are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. I will say, honestly, I was able to meet him a couple of times over the years, which was super cool because what I did at Lionsgate, I wasn't always sort of like talent facing. A lot of what
Yeah,
I was doing was kind of more behind the scenes. So it wasn't as common for me to be able to meet the actual talent, but I did get to meet him a couple of times, including a couple of times when he came into the office for different meetings or different sort of like anniversary little mini celebrations with respect to the franchise. And on each time, he was just super cool. So that kind of like added to my overall kind of affection for and enjoyment of the franchise. Just that he was such a cool person on a
yeah.
person to person level.
I've never heard anyone say a bad thing about him, which is like a rarity in Hollywood where there's so many people who have like mixed opinions of certain actors or actresses, like, oh, that person was mean to me, oh, that person was the nicest to me. And then there's some people who are like, I'm sure he's nice, I caught him on a bad day, it seems like. And then there's like the actors and actresses who are like, oh no, this person's like universally loved by everybody, and I always hear that about him. So I think that's
Yeah.
super cool. Um, I think as well, like there's so many other fun projects that Lionsgate has come out with over the years, and that I've deeply loved. For me as well, like I think that's a testament to how good Lionsgate has always been with films. Is that largely, if the Lionsgate logo is there, you know that it's going to be certifiably a great movie.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, also it's a testament to how kind of diversified Lionsgate has been over the years. They really try to do different things, and I think that allows them to experience success in different ways relative to other studios. So obviously, taking kind of the extreme example, but looking at a company like Disney, the model is completely different, the content is completely different, apples to oranges comparison in so many ways. And they have their hits, obviously. Lionsgate has a different has a different tactical playbook,
Yeah,
both with respect to sort of the main titles that they greenlight under, the Lionsgate Motion Picture Group in house, but then also the subsidiary companies, which turn out a lot of really great. Sometimes lower budget, not all the time, but
yeah,
genre specific titles. So under the tent poles, or sorry, beneath the tent pole franchises like the Twilight series and Hunger Games and John Wick and Saw, and these big franchises, you still have a lot of like really great content in there.
yeah,
And on the TV side as well, talk about cultural touch points, but Lionsgate has had some of the biggest successes in the quote unquote prestige TV era. Um, Maybe ending, maybe not. Everyone always likes to talk about that, but you go back to Weeds,
yeah,
and Nurse Jackie, and obviously Mad Men, and there's so many of these shows that really, again, kind of in so many ways captured the cultural zeitgeist. And in some cases continue to do so today. I mean, Mad Men is I think thought of
yeah,
and considered just as highly as it was when it came out originally. And then that
yeah.
speaks to the changing industry. There are different ways to discover these shows now as streaming deals get cut and whatever else. So it's different than it was when these shows first premiered, but nonetheless.
No, absolutely. I mean, even on the film side of things, look, my favorite, Lionsgate films were not John Wick or Hunger Games at first. It was the Divergent series and
Hmm.
it was the Now You See Me movies. And I'm thankful for those. I'm excited. I have yet to see the most recent Now You See Me movie, which
Hmm.
I know people are probably hating me right now for admitting. But also, again, to your point, like Mad Men was a great TV show for so many years. Weeds, Criminal Minds, and Grey's
Mm.
Anatomy have helped with those things. And then there's so many other cool things that have come out over the years across different platforms that I think when you look back to it, it's like, oh, that has the Lionsgate logo on it, which meant that it was something of quality. And that's something that you don't get, especially in these days of television, where it feels like everything is very much the same across all the different broadcast networks, cable networks, where it's like, I told someone yesterday you could turn on ABC, CBS, NBC, and it's cop dramas, medical shows, and like the occasional late night talk show, even though those are now going out the window.
Yeah. 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 So much of content has, become homogenized in that way. So yeah, I mean, anyone who's willing to put out something different is like huge in my mind. So for me, aside from Lionsgate, a couple of other companies that come to mind are like A24 and Neon
Yep.
on the film side. They both have put out such cool content, and so in the way that you're describing Lionsgate, I also kind of have viewed A24 in that way over the years. It's sort of like, they have been able to work with certain people, both, directors, actors, producers over the years. And it's sort of like, oh, if I see A24 on something and then they have this person attached, I know I'm going to like it. And,
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. Yeah. But
I had the same reaction because A24 is coming out with a movie based on the Backrooms, which came from
Yep.
YouTube. And I'm like, okay, you have the original creator here. You have the prestige of A24, which generally doesn't miss. And then I've seen like the fact that they're like, oh, for this set, it's like 50,000 square feet. And even we've got lost inside of it. And I'm like, if you guys have gotten lost inside of your own set in the middle of filming, I'm like, this is going to be a very good movie.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll get captured. Yeah, it's going to add to the suspense. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah.
And then what's the other A24 that was announced? Um,
Ooh.
it's
I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
based on the
Um,
video game, massive video game, and I'm just blanking.
no,
Um,
you're. I don't blame you. You know, it's
it'll
tough
come
to
to me.
remember. Yeah, like I immediately want to be like Call of Duty. I'm like, no, Paramount's doing that. So I, I hate the fact that I can't think about it. I feel like though everybody these days is
Elden
moving.
Ring.
Okay, yeah, I knew it was something, but also to your point about this, I feel like entertainment has kind of got to a point where it's stale and that like everyone's just now adapting everything. Like I'm a big fan of Life is Strange, which is a choice-based narrative game, and Amazon is adapting that with the help of Lucky Chap. And I'm thinking like, how do you take a choice-based narrative game that is the ending of it is still split video game wise, 49-51 by the fan base, and then also the same thing where like Fallout worked for them, but I'm like the only comparison to choice based narrative that we have is um the Boulder Snatch from Black
Mm,
Mirror, I think, and so
hmm.
like I'm intrigued on that. But also seeing all these video game adaptations, I'm always cautiously optimistic for like how are you going to have them directed? Like, I remember when the news for Call of Duty came out that they were going to do a film, and they're like, oh, Steven Spielberg has always wanted to direct Call of Duty, but we told him no, and I'm like, you have the greatest director on your hands, and you told him no.
Yeah,
So
crazy.
I wonder, do you think that entertainment is kind of in a regurgitation period, or like that this is something new that we're going to see where everything kind of is an adaptation again of something else and nothing original?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think we definitely have been in the regurgitation period for a long time now, and I think that again, culturally, I think we're kind of approaching a breaking point. The consumer generally has so many options these days, and it sounds cliche to say because we've been thinking about media kind of broadly speaking in this way for a while now. But I don't think that it's ever been as true as it is now. I look at some of the other areas that are out there. One of the areas that I'm doing, an increasing amount of work in is the video game space, kind of broadly. But you have UGC content, just kind of generally, and then within the video game space specifically. These platforms, if we look at video games, for example, looking at Fortnite and Roblox as two of the bigger examples in the space, the engagement numbers across these platforms just so far outstrip anything that the more legacy media companies have ever been able to achieve. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah,
I think that is not a replacement for legacy media. I think it is a complement of it. I don't think at all. Some people will say, "Oh, the theatrical experience is going away," and I actually feel like it's the opposite. I don't think that these other mediums are going to replace legacy media. They will complement them ultimately, but I think what that really means from a market perspective is that companies have to adapt, meet people where they are. You're fighting for attention in ways that you've never had to before. Again, even though I feel like that kind of theme has been discussed for a long time now, it's never been more true. The cleanest way out of that, I feel like, is just to break that cycle, that regurgitation cycle. Do something new, do something different. from a budget perspective, if that means taking a smaller swing and scaling things back, do that. Build, show up authentically, however you show up, meet people where they are, and build audiences in ways that maybe you didn't think you needed to previously. So I think overall, maybe it's a little bit of a rambling answer. I think I'm like fairly bullish on the idea, I guess, that we're on our way out of that regurgitation cycle.
Yeah, I think as long as creatives adhere to the content of the initial storylines that they're building off of, I think that you can respect fan bases. I think that's what's really great about like video games is people respect that. Um, I love as well that we're also in this period where I think entertainment companies, largely big, small, in between, are realizing that like some of the things that they previously had under their wheelhouse was actually valuable and are course correcting. Like Fox
Hmm.
initiating their partnership with HarperCollins, Paramount in the last few weeks as well. Like they sold off Simon and Schuster a few years ago, but they're like, hey, we're gonna create our own book packaging and publishing unit to do this and kind of adapt the Hello Sunshine model, which I think is great.
Hmm.
So I'm like super fascinated on that to be like, what does that mean for independent writers and authors and even largely like people who are fan fiction creatives, because there's some great stories that come out of that.
Hmm.
I think it's also terrible for me because like that's one of the things that I built a business around, was trying to help these people. And then literally like when I announced it, it was like Fox is partnering with HarperCollins, and 2 months later, or however many months later, then Paramount's like, we're doing this, and I'm like, well, great. Like I now have, I'm like, I had no competition, and now the biggest people out here that have the biggest check sizes are able to now just swing for the fences on anybody.
Yeah.
Um, so it sucks, but I love it at the same time. Look, this is the point in time with the podcast where I do something different, where I let the host take or the guest take over and bring up questions or topics that you want to talk about. So, Latha, the floor is yours.
Okay, no pressure. I mean, honestly, my first question would be, what you had asked me. What sparked your interest in entertainment broadly, any form of entertainment?
Sure.
What's that sort of first memory you have of getting that being something in your mind that was important to you?
I think for me, at a very early age, look, I was a Disney kid at the
Hmm.
same time that in summer of 2006, I discovered YouTube, and I also started playing Call of Duty for the first time. Yes, I was 6 years old playing Call of Duty 4. I get it. It's the thing that parents back then tried to dissuade. I still recommend parents do these days. The lobbies and the trash talk are not as bad as it was back then, but I
Definitely not.
digress. Um, but for me, I think like that's the biggest thing is that I got to experience all these different things all at one period of time where I was video games, music, television. Um, I remember, call back to you with skating. I remember I wasn't going to be a great skateboarder. I had a skateboard, but I sucked. But I loved playing Tony Hawk Ultimate Skater on the Nintendo GameCube. I still have my GameCube.
Oh, no
My
kidding.
I still have my GameCube. I'm pretty sure somewhere we have my original Game Boy and Game Boy 3D. And then also on the music side of things, look, I was a CD kid growing up, even though the iTunes was a big part of my life. And then my dad, when we lived on the East Coast, so 2007 to sometime in 2014, he had a Chrysler New Yorker that the only way you could listen to music was through the radio or cassette. And keep in mind, I think back then, when the car was made, FM radio or either FM radio or AM radio, because it was a 1980s car, did not
Hmm.
exist.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you had
yeah,
an entire spectrum of music that was gone.
yeah.
But that's the thing that I really appreciated. And I think largely as well, just because of all of these things, um, especially my love for creative content, storytelling content, and gaming, that's immediately what just kind of set me of like, the first channels I watched were Lonely Girl 15, Smosh, Philip DeFranco, What the Buck, Wine Cone, and then
Hmm.
was like when I saw the gaming channels like Optic, Machinima, Phase,
Hmm.
Wings of Redemption, that was where I was like, oh, so not only can I be a gaming nerd, but I can make content and like people love this. And so that's what started me down this rabbit hole of a journey 14 years later.
Yeah, yeah. That's so funny you mentioned Tony Hawk. So I have a signed copy of Tony Hawk Pro Skater from PlayStation.
Okay.
That's like one of my prized possessions. When Hermosa Beach, right next to Redondo Beach,
Yeah.
they opened up a city skate park, and we all it was such a big deal. We were like, everyone in the community came out for this, and on opening night Tony Hawk was there, um, doing signatures and skating and whatever else. It was so much fun. Yeah, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, hours. That was like hours and hours of my life. It was so much fun. Yeah, it's funny. So the reason I asked, I mean, obviously you asked me initially as well, but the reason that I asked is because, you know, you're in this way, I'm in this way. We're kind of like, we're plugged into this community, we're plugged
Yeah.
into the business side of it, and in all of these different ways. And I think when we're in it, it's easy to have this idea that entertainment, again, what does entertainment even mean? There are so
Yeah.
many different types of entertainment, different verticals, but that entertainment is massive, and it is, in a lot of ways it is massive, but it's also a very small, tight-knit community. I think my experience on the film and TV side, my relatively newer experience on the business side of the video game industry, they're both very different. Both are very, like, ultimately fairly close-knit communities. um, and it still shocks me. I have friends and family who, they'll see, like, they know when a big movie's coming out because there'll be a commercial for it, but they aren't plugged into it in the way that we are. And I forget that there are, I don't know, people like that, because
Yeah.
entertainment generally is just such a big part of my life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, look, I don't think my life would be where I am today if I hadn't discovered YouTube in 2006. And I'm thankful that like 14 years later, I still get to have a career after being able to start making videos in 2012. Because I
Hmm.
mean, pesky Google and their rules about you can't be on YouTube till age 13, and that
Yeah,
delayed me. I think had that rule not existed, I think I could have made some really great content as a kid on YouTube and in
yeah,
the gaming realm. But I digress for sure.
yeah.
Um, and I think it's also what led me to being able to start really great businesses as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it also has a lot to do with when we grew up, right? I'm think I'm a little bit older than you,
Sure.
but still fairly close in time, in terms of when we grew up, and our experiences with all these different cultural touch points have changed so meaningfully over the years. I feel like an old man being able to say, like, I remember when there was music on MTV, and
I
had
remember when
we
you could walk into a Blockbuster or a Hollywood Video.
completely, yeah, another big kind of cultural memory for me, the idea of going out to get pizza on a Friday night and
Yeah.
picking up a VHS tape at Blockbuster.
Or
um,
coming out of your local grocery store and picking up a red box.
Yeah, completely, and so, like, to state the obvious, had we grown up in the 60s, 70s, whatever, the rate of change of so many of these different things
Yeah.
obviously would have been much slower. So, I think, fast forward to today, and sort of, you've mentioned a couple of different ways that you've needed to adapt, your tastes and your interests are sort of always adapting. But then also on the business side, that's also, I think, that's it's required given sort of the major structural changes that have happened
Yeah.
in these different industries. But it's also a really exciting thing on I guess on a personal note, is because or rather the fact that it gives us so much opportunity to adapt and try new things. So I
I,
think
I think
net all of it,
also
I'm grateful.
I think also for me, like the best part about being on the business side as well as still being a creator is I get to wake up every day and what besides making my own content is figure what problems in music and film and television and the creator space need to be fixed and then know at the end of the day that like hey, I can sleep better at night knowing that somebody made a few cents more or a few dollars more than they would have, or somebody didn't get victimized because and now we fix this problem, whether it's making sure that talent gets paid beforehand or they can choose how much commission they want to give to a
Hmm.
talent manager. That to me is like okay, that you can't fake that kind of care. I think
Yeah.
also, and something I think from your generation that you'll appreciate that I have is my grandmother, my dad's mother, passed away last year, and I got to inherit a few of her things. One of which was a Sony CD player, but also these in the original packaging.
Nice.
I
Nice.
have I have that, and then I have a 4 pack of Maxwell's as well that sit on my desk next to my turntable. That's also a phono and radio and cassette player and recorder. I still keep them in the packaging because I'm like, look, for however long she had them, if they were still in the packaging then, they're staying in the packaging now.
Yeah, completely.
But one thing I wonder for you though, you are unique to understanding the business side of the entertainment industry. Good mutual friend of ours, Evan Shapiro, just put out this really interesting deep dive into late night TV and the finances around it, especially given the end of the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I
Hmm.
wonder, first off, do you think late night TV is dying? Do you think the the figures being thrown around of losing tens of millions of dollars a year on these late night shows is valid, or do you think that late night is still a thriving environment?
I think it's actually a thriving environment, to be honest. I did see that report. I haven't really gone into it in any detail, but I saw
Sure.
some of the numbers, and they make the case pretty clear,
Yeah.
pretty clearly, rather. So, I think it's one of those things. Matt Bellany was talking on his podcast recently, The Town. There was some discussion around late night, and I forget exactly the point that was made, but there was there's sort of this broader conversation around whether an audience will still show up for the longer format content, or whether the focus will be on clips, and different short form versions of that. This conversation has had a lot in the sports realm as
Yes.
well, but I think Matt, I have to look at what Evan put out, but Matt Bellamy was making the point based on the data that he was finding, that people are in fact showing up for the long form content. And I think,
Yeah.
it's just, again, going back to culture, the idea of late night is so culturally ingrained.
Yeah.
Certainly in my parents' generation, but even in my generation,
Yeah.
that I can't imagine it not existing. And I think with respect to the younger generations, high level, really kind of broadly speaking, I think that there's a big kind of correction being made, sort of off of screens, 24/7, 365,
Yeah.
and into IRL experiences, kind of broadly speaking. Now, late night is different than that, but to the extent it's a shared cultural touch point that people are all showing up for, I think that really resonates with even the younger generation. So, of course, it will adapt, and maybe the voices will change,
Yeah.
to an adapting audience, but maybe a more dynamic audience than was the case 30 years ago. But I can't see it disappearing completely.
Yeah. I would say I was very surprised when the show got canceled, and they mocked about this on the finale where they're like, I think you're the first late night show at number 1 to get canceled. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, the number one, like if SVU on NBC got canceled today, everyone would be in an uproar and like shell shocked. And I think like probably the offices at the Universal Studio lot would probably like burn to a crisp.
Hmm.
But like, I still think it's crazy. And like, yeah, I'm of the family that grew up on cable, and then eventually we moved away from paid TV to watching on streaming and IPTV. And then like even myself, when I'm at like late night at the office or doing my own stuff here, it's like I'm listening to Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. I'm watching clips of The
Hmm.
Daily Show. I'm watching the late night or the Late Show, and even I used to watch Conan growing up, and so like
Hmm.
even Jay Leno and David Letterman, where I'm like, oh, you guys are still out here. You guys are still alive and still doing cool stuff. It's like you haven't left us, and so I think like it'll
Yeah.
be interesting to see what Colbert does next.
Yeah.
I told somebody, I said, I think it'd be hilarious if his show got canceled on CBS and then he shows up in a few weeks from now doing the Colbert Report on the Daily Show.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that would be like the funniest thing, but also I feel like the man's probably deserved a vacation because he's been on television for now 20 something years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, kind of, higher levels, so much of what we consume across all of these different platforms is so heavily, if not kind of exclusively, algorithmically driven. So I think, again, correcting for that in any way possible, whereby, we can all come together just for a little bit and do the same thing at the same time. That's where I think, you get a lot of that, a lot of that, um, you know, hype. Hype's not even the right word, but that sort of like shared human experience
yeah,
around things like the World Series or the Super Bowl. Um, in different ways, but I think generally speaking, I think people are sort of craving the ability to come together and talk about the same thing at the same time, just for a minute.
yeah. I
That's what
think
late night has always represented to me.
I think Louis Cato, the guy who led the Late Show band, he put it very eloquently as well on the finale, where the relationship between the band, Steven, and the audience is a reciprocal emotional relationship. They
Hmm.
feel the news going in there. They're feeling the news at them from the stage, and also like whether it's through the musical guests, whether it's through the people that are brought on the show to have great conversations. I think like that's something that we start to lose more and more of.
Hmm.
I will give credit to Kimmel and Fallon. Like I think have also done a really good job of also highlighting artists and musicians in a way that nobody else does. Like I remember going on a cruise in the fall of 2024 and I woke up one day and I checked my phone and people were like, the metal band Knocked Loose has just performed on Jimmy Kimmel Live. And I'm like, excuse me? And then like they've had Poppy and Spirit Box perform on both Fallon and Kimmel. And I'm thinking like I listen to these artists and bands and metal, and it's like, okay, you're not just going out there and getting classical music guests or pop people. It's like you're integrating more and more with culture and establishing, hey,
Yeah.
like these are areas to also focus on. So I agree with you. Going back to the numbers, when I saw like the thing of, hey, we're losing $40 million a year and all that, I'm like, there's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way the number one show in late night for 9 years is losing money. Like, I've heard so many people say, well, the audience is smaller. It's because back in the day when Johnny Carson or Letterman were on, there were three channels,
Yeah.
on broadcast. Now there's 500 different cable channels and there's 5 main broadcast networks and everyone's vying for attention at different times across
Yeah.
different things. And it's like, then you have the folks who switch to streaming or saying, hey, why would I pay for cable or streaming when I can just watch it next day for free on
Hmm.
YouTube or on Pluto or CB or Tubi or whatever. So I agree with that as well. But what made you want to get into the creator and the gaming space?
I think again, new experiences. Going back again, yet again to appropriately, I guess, but to different types of culture. I've always kind of been aware of Fortnite. Never played it myself, but I know that it's been a cultural phenomenon for some time now. Honestly, it just came through networking initially. I was meeting, continuing to meet people from the space and, learning more about the opportunities that were currently in it on the business side. And I was also at the same time seeing that so many of the, legacy media companies were trying to figure out how they could, how they could get into it as well, how they could, leave their own mark in a variety of different ways, both from an investment perspective, but also from a brand integration and marketing perspective, from sort of a co venture, joint venture rather perspective in terms of developing out their IP in these spaces. And it just kind of struck me that, the more conversations I had, it became very clear that, there's a lot happening already, but at the same time, it's really in this sort of infancy stage, this sort of Wild West stage still. And that the idea of the opportunity there just became very exciting. So, tried to explore it as much as possible.
Yeah, I wonder, from your perspective, where do you think the creator space is thriving and what needs to be better? Because I see that like creator infrastructure as an all-time high. There's this battle between non AI content and AI content. There's the resurgence of short form. People are quote unquote discovering micro dramas as a new thing when I'm like they've been around for 20 years, but I
Hmm.
digress. But I wonder from your side of things, like where do you think that could be done? And then on the video game side of things, like I think there's so much passion that's still there, but also that's lost because there's not as many great story and narrative and adventure games. There's Life is Strange. There's the older games like Mirror's Edge or Far Cry or Watch Dogs that have just kind of been put back on the shelf.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe to answer with a little bit of a combo answer, but I think with respect to the creator space within, let's say, UGC video games specifically, I think probably the biggest issue right now is that there need to be sort of fundamental structural changes made such that these platforms are able to support like I always come back to this term a thriving robust middle market, right? At one end of the spectrum you have people who are doing different types of contract work for development studios or for bigger companies. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the big companies in the space. Many of these companies are doing really meaningful revenue, and they have high numbers of employees, and they have benefits, right? Like they're operating like legacy companies would. Um, but the delta in the middle is pretty big. So sometimes you'll see news articles about a like 17-year-old creator in Roblox who's now a multimillionaire, or within Fortnite. These things obviously do happen, but it's the top of the top end of the market, and there's a massive gap in the middle market. I think once I think Roblox and Fortnite obviously are very different. Fortnite has introduced, without getting into any necessarily specifics, but they've introduced some variants with respect to their monetization models. Roblox earlier this year came out with some different monetization options as well on the brand side. I think when those options become more robust, they become more widely adopted. Eventually by those communities, you'll see growth of that middle market. And that's so important from my perspective because I don't think that any of these platforms can survive long term without that really healthy middle market. So that's kind of the big one for me.
Absolutely. You know, I guess wrapping up this conversation and everything, where do you think the future of entertainment is headed? Where do you think the future for gaming is headed? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think transmedia has also become a popular term. I think that the development of like that perspective, broadly speaking, whether it's from the perspective of legacy film and TV studios, or from video game companies, whether AAA focused or UGC focused, I think that that will become more and more important. I think that in order to really kind of unlock and fuel this next wave of media consumption, these companies need to be open to doing things differently. The next great IP breakout, I don't think, will come from a small team within a broader development team at a studio. I think that it will come from the UGC space. I think that it will come from a joint venture between UGC creators and the infrastructure around a legacy studio. But one way or another, that back and forth has to happen. I think it already is happening in some pretty significant ways, but I think that will continue, and it will fuel our ability as the end consumer to interact with these IPs, interact with these different experiences, these characters, in ways that go beyond our sort of traditional understanding of looking at them on a screen, looking at them through our console on a video game. I think that will just continue to evolve. Obviously, this is whole nother conversation, but wearables continue to evolve. AR and XR continues to evolve. I
Yeah.
think the technology side of all of this is growing exponentially, and that will just kind of
Yeah.
support these underlying kind of IP initiatives.
The last thing I want to get your thoughts on is something I'm really intrigued at. I saw this story a few weeks ago. Neil Mohan, the CEO of YouTube, talked about how YouTube, because it's kind of deemed as the leader of television viewing these days,
Hmm.
across UGC content, mainstream content, it looks like they're going back into making original content, which is the first time since YouTube Red became YouTube Premium. I wonder, do you think that this time around it'll work better off for them? Do you think that there's maybe some projects from creators out there on YouTube, both and from the early days or established now, and that could really thrive? Because I remember, the first time around they really focused on trying to be an equivalent to the major studios, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I remember, for me, like the first ever channel I watched on YouTube, they were going to do a revival, and they went to YouTube to try to do programming, and they were like, "Well, our choice on franchise is you or Cobra Kai."
Hmm.
And we all know how that worked out. So I
Yeah.
wonder, like, how you, if you think this time around it'll work when they're focusing on more homegrown creators.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specifics around
Sure.
what he said, but I think generally speaking, the chances of it working this time around are probably meaningfully higher. I think so many YouTube creators have evolved to the point where they essentially are, and in some cases they actually are, fully functional development and production studios already. I think the quality of content from individual creators only continues to grow. I think the possibilities there are frankly pretty endless. I would be pretty bullish on it.
Absolutely. So, Latha, I appreciate you hopping on for the podcast. Where can people find what you're up to or connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, happy to connect on LinkedIn. Love meeting people from the creative space, from the business space. If you're building something kind of generally in any of these spaces, film, TV, video games, YouTube, any of these spaces, I'd love to meet and hear about what you're building. You just find me there is probably the best place. Just Latha Duncan on LinkedIn. Probably should include the spelling of my name as well. It's a little tricky, but yeah,
Yeah,
happy to
we'll
connect with
have all the
anyone.
links we'll have all the links in the description so that way people can find you and what you're doing because I think you are probably one of the best people I've talked to in the entertainment creator space as a whole. Over all the conversations we had, I think you understand where the space is going almost better than anyone that isn't at a social media platform or an entertainment studio. So I'm super happy that we got to have this conversation. We'll definitely have plenty more off camera. And who knows? One of these days, I'm hopefully planning on going to VidCon because I'm in the midst of getting ready to move, so that might be a fun challenge. But if I make it out there to LA, food is on me. Um,
Absolutely. Let's do it.
but I'm glad that we got to have the
Tacos,
conversation.
Tito's Tacos.
Yes, Tito's tacos, and then I will always wager a good In and Out burger over anything else.
Sounds perfect. Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
And for everybody watching or listening to the podcast, thank you for tuning in to a new episode. I'm trying to bring the best possible guests that I can have to have great conversations and carry on the tradition of culture and just ignite great conversations. So thank you all as well for making this thing possible and all the support you guys show across social media, the merch, everything that we're doing. And I hope to have more great people on as time progresses.